Welcome to Tabor Explains It All. In today's episode, I'll be covering the Enlisted AK12 variant, the hair trigger. Statistically speaking, it has a -1 to accuracy, or recoil, and a +1 to fire rate. But we'll talk more about this in just a second. Now, visually speaking, some say it has one of the better looking AK12 designs. In its standard form with no camo on it, it has a white appearance. The iron sights are different than the stock version, and they resemble the iron sights from the Call of Duty Ghosts AK12. There's also a serial code-like number etched on the side of the gun. I'm not quite certain if these numbers mean anything or if it's just that, a serial number of some sort. It almost looks like a foreign language. So let's talk about these bonuses and negatives the hair trigger receives. First, the -1 to accuracy. As you should know, the AK12 is one of the most accurate weapons in the entire game. Here are the recoil plots for the base AK12 and the variants that have no effect on recoil. On the left, you'll see is without grip, and on the right is with grip. Now let's add the hair trigger to the mix. Again, the left is without the grip, and the right is with the grip. As you can see, the -1 to accuracy adds +10% to view kick, which is very noticeable. You'll definitely feel this effect. The grip counters it pretty well, however. So now let's talk about the +1 fire rate the hair trigger receives. There's really only one thing holding the AK12 back from being the best gun in the game, and that's its fire rate. So you would think that a variant that increases the fire rate on an already powerful weapon would make it amazing, right? Well, unfortunately, a lot of the stats in-game lie. You should never trust the in-game stats, whether that be on the variants or the stock weapons. In this particular case, it's not so much the game lying about the +1 fire rate. Technically, it's not. Something called frame rounding is the culprit here. So the normal AK12 is coded to shoot at 750 RPM. And with frame rounding, that rounds down to 720 RPM. In comparison, the hair trigger is coded to shoot at 857 RPM, which also rounds down to 720 RPM. So what does this mean? It means that the hair trigger gets a coded fire rate increase of 107 RPM, but because of this frame rounding, both the stock AK12 and the hair trigger fire at 720 RPM, which of course are identical. Also, by the way, all the research and grip plots were obtained from the DenKirson message boards, which I'll link in the description. Now, I don't completely understand frame rounding, to be honest, and I'll put a good link in the description that explains it in depth if you're interested. I do know that it is prevalent in Advanced Warfare, though. There is a catch, however. This only applies to consoles. On the PC, you shouldn't experience frame rounding, which means that the +1 fire rate actually works as it's coded. On the PS4 and Xbox One, however, there will be no such benefit, and again, the normal AK12 will fire at exactly the same speed as the hair trigger AK12. Now on the last gen consoles, they experience a variable frame rate, which means that sometimes, and I emphasize that, the hair trigger will fire faster. Not always, and definitely not as fast as it's coded to, but it will sometimes fire faster. It all depends on the frame rate. From my understanding, the more action on your screen, the lower the frame rate. If the frame rate dips low enough, you'll start to notice the increased fire rate. On the current gen consoles, however, the frame rate hardly ever drops. So that's why the hair trigger won't experience its intended fire rate increase. Now, I know some of you may be saying, bullcrap. You may have the hair trigger and use it often and assume it fires faster on the current gen consoles, but don't be deceived. The gun sounds and looks like it fires at a different rate, but this is just the placebo effect. I've noticed that the game definitely lies with audio. Gunshot sounds are not synced and they are deceiving. That's why the hair trigger sounds and visually looks like it's shooting faster, but it's really not. If you still don't believe this, then watch this clip. The top AK12 is the hair trigger variant, and the bottom is the standard AK12. They empty their magazine at the exact same time, despite the top one actually looking and sounding like it's firing faster. Earlier I mentioned that the more action on your screen, the more the frame rate will drop. It is possible for the frame rate to drop even on the next gen consoles, so once in a while you may actually experience the hair trigger to fire faster. But again, it's not going to fire anywhere near as fast as it should be. If you're lucky, based on testing, you could experience about a 5% increase in fire rate, but at the cost of that 10% more view kick. Now, if it actually worked as coded, it would have a 14% increased fire rate. So this proves, at least on the next-gen consoles, that the hair trigger is basically a pointless variant. You get increased recoil for no additional fire rate except very occasionally, and then it'll only go up 5% instead of its coded 14%. Of course, if the AK12's fire rate is ever buffed, this could change things and the hair trigger may work as intended. As it stands now though, I would not recommend using this. Now personally, I would potentially hold on to this just in case the fire rate is ever buffed. And that, as they say, is that. Hopefully I've explained this thoroughly enough that I've made you a believer. Always remember to never believe the in-game stats. They are always deceiving.